The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving only a deep orange memory across the plains. The ranch stretched quiet and still, the kind of silence that usually meant peace, but tonight, something was wrong. The old windmill creaked lazily, and somewhere out near the barn, a faint sound floated through the cool night air. At first, the rancher thought it was the whimper of a calf or maybe a fox caught in one of the traps. But as he paused near the porch, lantern in hand, the sound grew clearer, sobbing, soft broken sobbing that made his chest tighten. He frowned, setting down his cup of coffee and pulling on his coat. No one came this far out without a reason. His boots crunched over the dry dirt as he moved toward the barn, each step echoing in the emptiness. The air felt heavy, tense, as though the night itself was holding its breath. The closer he got, the clearer the sound became. A young voice, shaking, crying as though it carried the weight of something unspeakable. "Hello?" he called out, his voice low but firm. "Anyone there?" No answer. Only the sound of stifled breathing and a faint clink of metal. He lifted the lantern higher and pushed open the barn door. It creaked wide, spilling warm light across the darkened interior. Dust motes danced in the beam, and the smell of hay and old wood filled his nose. He swept the light across the stalls, empty. Then a flash of movement near the far corner caught his eye. Behind a stack of hay bales sat a rusted cage. Something shifted inside it. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by frightened silence. The rancher's pulse kicked up. He stepped closer, careful not to startle whatever or whoever was in there. The lantern light fell across a small figure curled up on the floor of the cage. A girl. Her face was streaked with dirt and tears, her hair tangled and matted like she hadn't seen a brush in weeks. Her knees were drawn to her chest, and her thin arms wrapped tightly around them as if she could make herself disappear. She couldn't have been older than 10 or 11. "Hey now," he said softly, crouching down to her level. "You don't need to be afraid. I'm not gonna hurt you." Her eyes flicked up to meet his, wide and terrified. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw. "Please don't let them come back." The rancher's brows knitted. Who's coming back?" But the girl shook her head and buried her face in her arms again, her shoulders trembling. He glanced around, scanning the floor for any sign of who might have done this. There were scuff marks near the cage, boot prints, fresh ones, and a length of rope tossed carelessly nearby. The lock on the cage door looked old but recently used. A chill ran down his spine. Someone had locked this girl up here, and not long ago. He reached out, testing the latch. It rattled but didn't open. He looked back at her. "I'm gonna get you out of here, you hear me?" he said, voice steady but urgent. "You're safe now." The girl didn't answer, but her crying quieted. The rancher straightened up, setting his lantern on a nearby barrel. The flame flickered, throwing long shadows across the walls. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone might still be watching, hidden in the dark fields beyond. He drew a deep breath, hand resting on the latch once more. "All right," he murmured. "Let's see who you are and what in God's name happened here." As he worked the lock, the night wind pushed through the cracks in the barn, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and something else. Smoke. The rancher froze, eyes narrowing. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp and alert. The sobbing had stopped completely now. Only silence remained, heavy and expectant, as he finally heard the old metal latch click open. The latch gave way with a metallic snap that echoed through the still barn. The rancher lifted the cage door slowly, cautious not to startle the girl inside. The hinges groaned, and for a moment she flinched as if expecting another blow. Her small body pressed against the far corner, trembling. "Easy now," he said gently. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you. You're safe." She didn't believe him. Her wide, frightened eyes darted from his hands to the shadows behind him, like she expected someone else to step through the door at any moment. When he moved closer, she gasped and pulled back, her fingers gripping the cold bars until her knuckles turned white. The rancher stopped where he was and lowered himself to one knee, bringing his face closer to her level. "You hungry?" he asked softly. "Got some bread and water here. You look like you need both." He slid the small canteen and a piece of bread across the dirt floor toward her. For a few seconds, she didn't move. Then hesitantly, she reached out with shaking hands and took them. She sipped the water first, her throat working hard as though it hurt to swallow. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. Her lips trembled. Don't got one anymore. That answer made the rancher's stomach turn. He could hear the exhaustion and despair behind her words. Someone had broken this child down, stripped her of even her sense of self. Well, he said after a pause, I'm Hank. Folks around here just call me the rancher. You can call me that too if you like, she didn't reply. She tore off a small bite of bread and chewed in silence, still watching him like a trapped animal. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. He noticed scratches along her wrists, old bruises hidden beneath grime. He leaned back on his heels. Who put you in that cage, miss? Her gaze flicked toward the barn door, then to the far wall. She swallowed hard, lowering her voice to a whisper. They did. Who's they? The men, she said, her voice trembling. The ones who said they'd come back tonight. Hank's jaw clenched. You mean they're coming here? She nodded faintly, clutching something against her chest. It was a small ribbon, pink, frayed, and dirty. The faint embroidery on it caught the lantern light. A single stitched word that looked like part of a name. He reached out a little. That yours? She shook her head. It was hers. The word sent a chill down Hank's spine. He didn't ask who her was, not yet. The fear in the girl's voice told him more than enough. He rose, his boots crunching softly against the hay. His eyes swept the barn again, this time with purpose. Fresh boot prints marked the ground near the back door. 2 sets, heavy and deep. Someone had been here not long before him, and from the direction of the tracks they hadn't left in a hurry. The rancher's instincts kicked in. He crossed to the door, pushing it open just enough to peer outside. The prairie stretched endless and dark beneath the moonlight. The wind moved the tall grass in waves, whispering secrets he couldn't quite catch. He turned back to the girl. Listen to me, we're leaving this place, he said firmly. You're not staying another minute in that cage. She looked at him with hesitation. They'll find me. Not if I have anything to say about it. He pulled an old blanket from a nearby crate and draped it gently over her shoulders. She flinched at first but didn't pull away. Hank blew out the lantern and gathered his things, his heart pounding. He could feel it now, the sense of being watched, of eyes hiding just beyond the edge of the lamplight. Somewhere out there in the darkness, the men she spoke of might already be waiting. Stay close to me, he said, his voice low but steady. We're going to get you warm, fed, and safe. I promise. As they stepped out into the night, the wind rose again, moaning across the open fields. Behind them, the empty cage swung gently in the dark, its rusted door creaking back and forth, as if the ghosts of fear still lingered there. The rancher led the girl across the barnyard toward his cabin, the night air crisp and heavy with the scent of damp earth. She clung to his hand, small and fragile, as though letting go would mean being swallowed by the darkness. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, each sob threatening to start again at any moment. Hank kept his voice low and calm, hoping the sound of his presence would comfort her, though he knew the shadows surrounding them were alive with uncertainty. The cabin came into view, its warm light spilling from the windows, a stark contrast to the cold and threatening blackness of the prairie beyond. The girl hesitated at the door, glancing back toward the barn. They'll find me, she whispered, fear gripping her voice like an iron fist. Hank knelt, turning her gently to face him. No one's gonna find you here. Not tonight. He stepped aside and opened the door, ushering her inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and old pine, a comforting aroma that wrapped around her like a blanket. Hank set the lantern on the kitchen table, its flame casting soft, wavering shadows along the walls. She sank onto a chair, hugging herself, eyes darting toward every corner, as if expecting someone to burst through the door. Hank went to the stove, pouring water into a tin cup and setting it in front of her, along with a piece of bread. She hesitated, glancing at the food as though it might be poisoned. Eat, he urged gently. You need your strength. After a moment, she took a small bite, then another, each movement tentative. She finally looked at him, her eyes still wide with terror. Why are you helping me? Hank sat across from her, his elbows resting on his knees. Because no child should be left alone in the dark, he said, his voice steady. Because it's wrong. And because I can't just walk away when I hear someone crying. The girl's lips trembled. She wanted to trust him. She wanted to believe it. But fear had rooted itself deep in her chest. Hank could see it, years of abuse and neglect etched into her posture. her every glance, every flinch. Suddenly, the crackle of static from the radio on the shelf caught Hank's attention. He picked up the handset, speaking carefully into it. "Sheriff, it's Hank. Yes, I've got a situation. A girl, yes, alive, but..." The line's breaking up. Static. Then a burst of interference. A storm was approaching, he realized. Lightning flickered across the window panes, illuminating the girl's frightened face. Hank cursed under his breath. They'd have no help tonight. A sudden flash of headlights on the dirt road outside made both of them freeze. Someone was coming, and fast. Hank's eyes narrowed as he peered through the window. Two figures emerged from the dust. Long coats dusted with grit. Wide-brimmed hats pulled low over their faces. "They're looking for a lost child," the taller one called in a hollow voice, trying to sound convincing. But Hank could see the cold calculation in their eyes, the way they scanned the property like predators. Without a word, he guided the girl toward the cellar door beneath the kitchen floorboards. "Down here. Quick," he whispered. She obeyed, her small hands gripping his as they descended into the darkness. Above, the men knocked on the cabin door, their voices rising, demanding entry. Hank's heart raced, but he stayed calm, letting the storm outside mask the sound of their footsteps. He could feel the tension pressing down on him, heavy and suffocating as the men prowled the cabin searching, unaware that their prey was hidden mere feet below. The girl's breathing shook in the silence, and Hank rested a steady hand on her shoulder. "They won't find you," he whispered. "Not tonight. Not here for a long moment." Only the storm and the shadows filled the room, and in that tense stillness, the rancher vowed silently he would not let her fall back into their hands. The storm outside had passed, leaving only a damp chill in the cabin and the distant echo of dripping rain from the eaves. The men had disappeared into the night, their footsteps fading into the vast emptiness of the prairie. In the dim glow of the lantern, the girl sat huddled on the floor, her small frame trembling not from cold, but from exhaustion and fear. Hank knelt beside her, letting her settle before speaking. For a long while, neither said a word, the silence stretching like a taut rope between them. Finally, the girl lifted her head, her eyes glistening in the lantern light. I wasn't supposed to see it," she whispered, her voice fragile. Hank leaned closer, encouraging her to continue. "See what?" She swallowed hard, shivering as though the memory alone could burn her. "At the settlement, I saw something they didn't want anyone to see. Something bad." Her hands clenched at the frayed ribbon she still carried. "A theft, or maybe a killing. I don't know. I just know they came after me because I saw it." Hank's jaw tightened. The fear in her voice painted a picture far grimmer than anything he had imagined. "And who are they? Who did this to you?" "They work for the rancher," she said, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. "A cruel man. People say he takes children to work, to keep them quiet, to do his bidding. I ran, but when I tried to hide, they locked me in the cage as punishment, to scare anyone else who might try to escape." Hank's hands curled into fists at his sides. Rage flared through him, hot and immediate. No one, no matter how powerful or dangerous, had the right to harm a child. He could feel the weight of responsibility settle over his shoulders like armor. "I promise," he said firmly, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're never going back there. Not to him. Not to anyone who'd hurt you." The girl's eyes searched his face, doubt and hope warring in the depths of her gaze. She nodded slowly, leaning against him slightly, as though the promise alone could shield her from the darkness outside. Hank knew better. Making that promise wasn't just a comfort. It was a declaration of war. By protecting her, he had painted a target on his own back. The cruel rancher and his men would not forgive such defiance. He could already imagine their return, lurking in shadows, seeking revenge. But he refused to let fear dictate his actions. He would face whatever came, and the girl would not face it alone. Her secret, the truth of what she had seen, the horror she had endured, was now his burden as well. "I'll keep you safe," Hank repeated, more to himself than to her. The fire in the hearth flickered across their faces, casting shadows that danced and stretched as if in warning. Outside, the prairie was quiet, but Hank knew the calm would not last. Danger was coming, and he would be ready. For the first time since the cage, the girl allowed herself a small, trembling sigh of relief, though the fear still lingered in her wide eyes. Hank tightened his grip gently, silently vowing that whatever storms awaited, they would face them together. Night had swallowed the ranch, leaving only the dim glow of the cabin lanterns and the pale light of the moon glinting off the dew-soaked grass. Hank had barely slept, his mind alert for the faintest sound of movement. He knew they would come back. The cruel rancher's men would not let their prey slip away so easily. And tonight the wind carried the promise of confrontation. It started with the sound of hooves, soft at first, then pounding against the earth, echoing across the open fields. Hank's hand went to his rifle instinctively, the weight solid and reassuring in his grip. From the shadows emerged two figures, moving with a predatory precision, their eyes glinting beneath the brims of wide hats. The taller one brandished a gun, the other a club, both intent on taking back what had escaped their control. "Step away from the girl," Hank barked, voice carrying across the night. He positioned himself between the intruders and the cabin, rifle steady, muscles coiled. The girl huddled behind him, small and trembling, yet her eyes held a spark of defiance, a silent plea for survival. The taller man sneered. "She belongs to him. Hand her over, or we'll take what's ours." Hank's finger tightened on the trigger. "She belongs to no one but herself, and I'm not letting you near her." A tense silence stretched for a heartbeat too long. Then suddenly gunfire shattered the stillness. The first shot rang out, echoing off the barn and the surrounding fences. Horses in the nearby corral bolted, their panic sending a cascade of noise through the darkness. Hank returned fire, careful and deliberate, his eyes never leaving the girl. Chaos erupted. The taller man collapsed to the ground, a cry escaping his lips, while the other turned and sprinted into the desert, disappearing into the black expanse beyond the ranch. Hank exhaled sharply, adrenaline coursing through his veins, but the danger was far from over. A stray ember from a lantern had caught the barn roof, and flames began to lick the wooden beams, hungrily consuming the dry hay stacked within. "Go. We have to get out," Hank yelled, grabbing the girl's hand. But she didn't move. She was at the barn's edge, staring at a small foal trapped beneath fallen timbers, whinnying in panic. "Come on," Hank urged, but the girl shook her head. "We can't leave it." With a surge of courage, she worked to free the frightened animal, her small hands pulling at the timbers. Hank joined her, lifting the heavier pieces and calming the foal as smoke curled around them. Together, they managed to free it, the foal nuzzling her shoulder in gratitude. Hank took her hand again, this time pulling her away from the growing inferno. Smoke choked the air, thick and suffocating, as they ran through the night toward safety. Behind them, the barn burned, a roaring inferno that would leave nothing but ashes and memories of the terror they had escaped. They emerged into the open prairie, coughing and gasping, yet alive. The fire painted the night sky red, a beacon of the night's reckoning, and a warning to those who dared to hunt the innocent. Hank looked down at the girl, her face streaked with soot but lit with determination. "We made it," he whispered, voice raw. "We survived. And no one's taking you back." The first light of dawn stretched across the prairie, painting the burned remains of the barn in shades of gold and ash. Smoke still curled lazily from the charred timbers, a thin reminder of the night's chaos. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of scorched wood and dew. And the ranch was quiet now, as though it were holding its breath after the storm. The distant sound of a sheriff's horse broke the stillness. Hank stepped forward, squinting as the lawman rode up, flanked by deputies. The wounded man from the night before, groaning in pain and bloodied from the gunfight, was quickly restrained and taken into custody. Justice, at least for now, had arrived. Inside the cabin, the girl sat wrapped tightly in a thick woolen blanket, her body still trembling from fear and exertion. But there was a newfound calm in her eyes, a glimmer of trust she hadn't dared to show before. Hank knelt beside her, brushing soot from her hair and smiling gently. "Can I tell you my name?" she whispered, her voice soft, almost afraid it might vanish if she spoke it aloud. Hank nodded. "Of course." "What is it?" "Mara," she said, her lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. The name felt like a fragile bridge to a life she thought she'd lost forever. Hank helped her to her feet and led her outside, where the early sun warmed their backs. A sturdy horse stood waiting, saddled and ready. With careful hands, he helped Mara climb into the saddle, ensuring she felt steady and secure. The rancher mounted behind her, his arm steadying her shoulder. "We're taking you somewhere safe," he said firmly, "and then we'll make sure the men who did this pay for what they've done. You'll never have to hide or cry in a cage again." Mara clutched the reins, her small hands trembling slightly, but Hank's steady presence gave her courage. Together, they rode across the open prairie, the wind in their hair and the sun casting long shadows behind them. The burned barn receded in the distance, a symbol of the horrors they had endured and overcome. Hank glanced back once, voice low and reflective. No one should ever cry in a cage again. His words carried over the plains, a promise and a warning, as well as a quiet homage to the resilience of the human spirit. The ride stretched ahead, long and uncertain, but for the first time Mara felt safe. The rancher's steadfast courage and compassion had given her a second chance, and with each step of the horse, the future seemed a little brighter, filled with hope, justice, and the enduring spirit of the frontier. The world was vast and untamed, but for Mara, it had suddenly become a place where she could belong.